וממון. sipurei masios. sipurei masios. sipurei masios, the 12th story. In the middle, part B. Ta'shu speaking me for שאני רוצה speaking me for שכולכם ובכל משהו בורתים לפעם כדי נקוד שמנחם פי ושמחה רבה נח נחמו נחמה מאומה וסמירה וסמית סבירה ומיתים צוות דוי דפאפן מוסים טובי הרץ משה פסק סור והידה לידי סור דוי ואז שלוימון עד ועל קו מוסים נח נחמו נגימן Nachmo. I asked him, what is this that you say about the warrior? Isn't this the warrior? Is this the warrior? As above, he answered them, inasmuch as I used to be with the king, and to the king a warrior was lost, and if this is that warrior, I am acquainted with him, and furthermore, you're relying on the country where you say they are all gods. This is nonsense, because they will not be able to help you whatsoever, just the reverse that will end up being your downfall if you rely on them. They asked him, where do you know this from? He answered them, it was like this. The king whom he was with had by him a hand yad. That is, the king had something resembling a hand with 5 fingers, and with all the grooves, that is, all the creases and ruts that are on a hand, and the hand was the map of all the worlds and all that has been since the creation of heaven and earth until the end, and what will be afterwards was all depicted on the hand, for depicted in the scratches and folds of the hand was the diagram of all the worlds, how every world stands, with all the things of every world in detail, everything standing out on the hand as depicted on a land map, as is known to those who are used to land maps. That is, depicted on a paper is each town, every country, and every bridge, and similarly of the things, streams, woods, etc. By everything it is all written down that this is this town, that this is this town, and this is that country, and so forth. Thus all the worlds were depicted on the hand by the ruts and folds of the hand, and in the ruts of the hand were as if letters, just as letters are inscribed on a map next to each thing, so that they may know what it is that they should know, that here is this town and here is this stream, and likewise other things, in exactly the same way by the ruts of the hand were depicted the likeness of letters next to everything depicted on the hand, so as to know what everything depicted there is. Thus every city separately, every town, and all the rivers, bridges, mountains, and other objects, whatever is found in the world and in all the worlds, was all depicted on the hand by the ruts and folds on the hand, and by everything there always stood letters, that this is this thing and that is that thing, etc. And also all the people who go around in every country, and all their experiences, that is, everything that passes over a man during his lifetime, were all depicted on the hands, and even all the past from one country to another, and from one place to another were written on it, and on account of that I knew the way to come in here to this town, which no man can enter, because the wealthy city had dug around the cities, and nobody could come to them as above. And so if you want to send me into the other town, I know the way to, all through the hand. And also imprinted on the hand was the way from one world to another world, for there is a path and a course on which one can ascend from earth to heaven. One. And also imprinted on the hand was the way from one world to another world, but there is a path and a course on which one can ascend from earth to heaven, for one cannot go up from earth to heaven due to not knowing the way, but depicted there was the way to go up to heaven. So depicted there were all the paths that exist from one world to another world, for Eliyahu ascended to heaven with this path, and that path was written there. Moses went up to heaven with a different path, and that other path was also written there, and like was Enoch ascended to heaven with yet another path, and that path was written there too. Thus from one world to the other, farther higher world. Thus from world to the other, farther, higher world was all depicted by the ruts and folds of the hand. Also represented on the hand was everything as it was at the time the world was created, and as it is now, and as it will be, and as it will be afterwards. For instance, Sodom was depicted there as that city had been while inhabited before it was overturned. In addition, depicted there was Sodom being upheaved as a city turning over, and again depicted there was Sodom as it appears today after the upheaval. For on the hand was depicted what was, what is, and what will be, and there on the hand I have seen that the country of which you say they are all gods, together with all the people who come to them for help, that is, that the city should help them, will both all be obliterated. All this the prayer leader told them. It was an extraordinary novelty to them, for it was recognized that this is true talk, because it is known that on a map all themes are depicted, so they understood that his words are true, since such things cannot be thought up, because one can see for himself that he can put together two ruts of the hand, and a letter will become of them. For this reason they understood this is no contrived thing, thus it was an extraordinary novelty to them. They asked him, whereabout is the king? Perhaps he will show us a way how to find money. He answered them with an expression of someone who is awestruck and angered. You still want money? Don't talk about money at all. They asked him nonetheless, tell us where the king is. He answered them, I too don't know of the king where he is, and this is how the story happened. Once there was a king and a queen, and they had an only daughter, and it came near the time to marry her off, so they seated advisors to give counsel as to whom she ought to be married off to, and I too was there among the advisors. That is the prayer leader who is still relating this in front of them. Because the king liked me, and my advice was that they should give her the warrior, because the warrior had brought us many benefits, for he had conquered many countries, therefore he ought to be given the queen's daughter for a wife. My advice was very liked, and they all agreed upon it, and there was a big celebration there for having found a groom for the queen's daughter, and they wed the queen's daughter with the warrior, and the queen's daughter had a child, and the baby was quite an extraordinary beauty, being no sort of human beauty whatsoever, His hair was golden and had all the colors, his face was like the sun, and his eyes were other luminaries. And the child was born with mature wisdom, because they saw in him immediately when he was born that he is already a great sage. For when people were talking in the place where one needs to laugh, he would laugh. And so with the things they likewise recognized him being a great sage, except not yet having the motions of an adult, namely he had not yet the faculty of speech and other such things, but this they saw right away that he is already a big genius. And with the king was an orator, that is a speaker who was a master of language and rhetoric, who was able to talk very fine talk, very beautiful speeches, songs and praises for the king. And the orator was on his own account a fine orator too, but the king showed him the hidden path and the way for him to go up and get the power of the science of rhetoric, and thereby he became a very superb orator. The king also had a sage, and the sage was also a sage on his own account, but the king showed him the way for him to go up and get wisdom, and thereby he became an extraordinary superb sage. And similarly the warrior was mighty on his own, but the king showed him the way for him to go and get strength, and thereby he became an extraordinary superb warrior. For there's a sword that hangs in the air, and the sword has 3 powers. When the sword is lifted, then all the officers of the opposing army flee. So as a matter of course they fall. Because when the officers flee, there is no one to lead the battle, so they certainly fall. But despite this, the survivors may still be able to wage war. However, the sword has 2 sharp edges, and they have 2 powers. Through one edge they all fall, and through the other edge they get the sickness called dar. dar, wasting consumption, namely the enemies whom they are fighting become meager of flesh and lifeless, as is known of his sickness. The merciful one spare us. So by merely making a move with the sword in its place, the enemies are stricken with the aforementioned things. That is, by using one edge the enemies have defeat, and by using the other edge the enemies are stricken with dar, as mentioned. And the king showed the warrior the path that there is to the sword, and from there he attained his great strength. And to me the king also showed the way to get my thing. I got from there what I need. In other words, the prayer leader who was telling all this said that the king showed him the way from which to get his thing, namely prayer. And like the king had a faithful friend, well, he had them a literally faithful one who loves. In other words, a getting find a getting a good trusty friend who was in love with the king. Was hat sich lieb gehabt mit dem Melech, literally who loved himself with the king with a very extraordinary love. They loved each other so much that it was utterly impossible for them to be one without seeing the other for some amount of time. But nonetheless, there must be times when they need to be apart. So they had portraits in which both their images were depicted. They would delight themselves, in other words, take pleasure and satisfaction with the portraits when they could not see each other. And the images depicted how the king and his faithful friend love each other and hug and kiss each other with great love. The portraits had the special ability that whoever looked at the images, whoever looked at the images attained great love. In other words, one received the trait of love when looking at the images, and the faithful friend also received the love that is the amorousness from the place which the king showed him. That is the amorousness. Amorousness from the place which the king showed him. There came a time when they all went. Each one was placed to receive his power for his thing. His power for his thing. That is the orator and the warrior and all the king's people each went up to his place to renew his power. And the day came to pass there was a very big storm wind. A big storm wind upon the world, and the storm wind mixed up the entire world and overturned sea to dry land, and dry land to sea, and wilderness to settled area, and settled area to wilderness. So it overturned the entire world. The storm wind went into the king's chamber and did nothing at all there. In other words, there the king's, it brought absolutely no damage, except the storm wind went in and snatched away the aforementioned child of the queen's daughter. And amidst the commotion, as soon as the storm wind snatched away the dear child, the princess followed immediately. In other words, the princess immediately began to run after the child in order to snatch him back. She too went off someplace no one knows where. So to the queen and so to the king, they all went after the child until they all became dispersed, and no one knows where they are. But all of us were nowhere nearby during this, for we were gone away, then each to his place to renew his power as mentioned. And when we came back, we could no longer find them all as mentioned. The hands who became missing then. So from that time on, we have all become scattered and can no longer each go to his place to renew his power. But since the entire world has been overturned, we now need different paths today. Therefore, we have no longer gone up each to his place to renew his power. Ever the impression that remains by each of us, meaning the token that is the little bit that has remained by each one from long ago, is also very great. That if this mighty one which the country feared is the king's warrior, he is certainly a very mighty warrior. All this the prayer leader told the people, and they heard out his words and were very amazed. And now they held the prayer leader fast by them, and would no longer let him go from them, because perhaps the warrior upon them is the king's. Perhaps the warrior upon them is the king's warrior mentioned above, with whom the prayer leader is acquainted. And the aforementioned warrior kept coming closer to the country, always sending his emissaries to them, until he reached the country, and he stationed himself below the city and sent his emissaries inside inside to them, for them to tell him what they want, to submit themselves or not. As above, they were very terrified. They were very terrified of him, and they begged the prayer leader that he should give them a suggestion. The prayer leader told them it was necessary to inspect the conduct of this warrior, in order for him to recognize thereby if this is the aforementioned warrior of the king. The prayer leader went out towards the warrior, and he reached the warrior's army and began talking with one of the warriors accompanying warriors, that is, with one of his sentries, in order to examine if he is the warrior whom he is familiar with. The prayer leader asked him, what are your doings, and how have you got together with the warrior? He answered him, that one warrior replied to the prayer leader, what's the place was like this? It is written in the chronicles how there had been a great storm wind over the world, changing sea to dry land, and dry land to sea, and wilderness to settled area, and settled area to wilderness, mixing up the entire world. And after the noise and the upheaval, the entire world having become so mixed up, the world's people decided to make a king for themselves. They started to investigate who ought to be made a king, who ought to be made king over them, and they reasoned, inasmuch as the essential thing is only the ultimate purpose, tachlis. Therefore, whoever most occupies himself with and exerts himself in the purpose of the world, he deserves to be king. They began probing what is the purpose, and several opinions arose among them. One faction said that the main object is honor, for we see that the world considers honor the main thing, because when a person is not given his respect, that is when some word is uttered against his honor, he experiences bloodshed, because the main thing is honor for the entire world, and even after death, people are careful to give to the dead his honor, burying him with respect and so forth, and telling him what is being done for you is all being done on account of your honor, even though after death one no longer wants any money, and the dead person certainly has no desire for anything. Nevertheless, they are particular about the honor of the dead and guard his honor. Therefore, it is honor that is the main object. They continued saying more such conjectures and deductions of the sort, that honor is the main object of the world, until it became settled among them that the main purpose is honor. Therefore they needed to search for an honorable person, that is to say, a person who attains honor, and moreover the person should also pursue honor, for since he receives honor and pursues it, and assists human nature which desires honor, therefore this person exerts himself and pursues after the main goal, and has reached it, because the goal is after all honor as mentioned. Therefore such a person deserves to be king. All this was the foolish opinion of the sect of them, and so they found foolish conjectures and deductions until they became led astray therein, and said that honor is the purpose. Likewise all the other factions that will appear below all had foolish reasonings for their foolish notions, Hebrew only. Some of them are explained below, but Rבינו did not want to explain all the perplexed reasonings for these beliefs, because there are some rationales in this that are so perplexed that it is possible to indeed be led astray by these false rationales. The merciful one spare us. They went searching such a person, and they went and saw an old gypsy beggar being carried. While following him were perhaps 500 gypsies, and the beggar was blind, hunchback, and mute. And all these people followed him because they all were his relatives, for he had sisters, brothers, and seed of his loins, until there came to be so many of them, all of whom followed him and carried him. Until there came to be so many of them, all of whom followed him and carried him. The old beggar was very particular about his honor, for he was a very angry person, and always heaped his great indignation upon them, always ordering that others should carry him, and always scolding them. Hence the elderly beggar is a very honorable man, because he has such an honor, and also pursues honor because he is so strict over his honor. Therefore this beggar pleased them, and they accepted him as a king. And because land also has an effect, for there is a land that engenders and is conducive to honor, and similarly there is a land that is specially suited for another trait. Therefore this faction which regarded honor as the main purpose sought a country that engenders and is conducive to honor, and they found such a country that is conducive to it, and they settled there. One faction said that the main object is not honor, and they conceived that the main object is murder. For we see that all the things that are found upon the earth, grasses and all plants and people, and all that is in the world must all ultimately cease to exist. Hence the very goal of all things is to be finished off, that is destroyed. Therefore a murderer who kills and destroys people is really bringing the world to its purpose. Therefore they came to the conclusion that the goal is murder. They look for a person who would be a murderer, an angry person, and an extremely vengeful person, for such a person is closest to the purpose according to their deluded mindset, and he deserves to be king. They went looking for such a person, and they heard a shriek. They asked, what is this, such a screech? They replied to them, this shriek is someone has slaughtered his father and mother. They spoke up, where else can one find such a strong-hearted and angry murderer, that he should murder his own father and mother? This here man has reached the purpose, that is the one who has slaughtered father and mother, and they were extremely pleased by him, and they accepted him as a king over them, and they sought for themselves a country that brings about murder, and they chose a place among the mountains where killers abide, and they went there and settled there with their king. A faction said, one faction, another faction, a faction. Another faction said that he deserves to be king, who has a great abundance of food and does not eat the fare of other people, but only find food such as milk, so that his mind should not become coerced. Such a person not to be king. So however they could not immediately find such a person who would not eat the foods of other people. In the meantime they chose themselves a rich man who had plenty of food, and whose food was a bit finer, until they would find such a person as they want, who would not eat, etc., as above. And meanwhile they made the rich man into a king, until they would find such a person as they want, as above. Then the rich man would descend from the rain, and the other one would be taken up as a king, and they chose for themselves a country suited for this, and they went and settled there. A faction said that a beautiful woman is fit to be king, for the main object is, after all, that the world should be inhabited with people, since for that reason the world was created. And since rememon. For that reason the world was created. Since for that reason the world was created, and since a beautiful woman brings about that desire through which the habitation of the world grows greater. Since more people come about, it follows she brings the world to the goal. Therefore a beautiful woman deserves to be king. They chose for themselves a beautiful woman, and she became king over them, and they sought for themselves a land conducive to this, and they went there and settled there. A faction said that the main object is speech, because the distinction between a man and a beast is only speech, and since that is the essential in which a man is greater than a beast, therefore it is the main purpose, that is speech. They sought for themselves a speaker, that is a talker, who would be eloquent, and who would know many languages, and would always talk a great deal all the time. For such a person is at the goal. They went and found a French lunatic who was going around talking to himself. They asked him if he knows languages, and he knew several languages. Now such a man has certainly already reached the goal according to foolish, deluded ideas, since he's a master of language. knows many languages and talks a great deal. Since he's a master of language, knows many languages and talks a great deal. For he talks even to himself, after all. For he talks even to himself, after all. Therefore they were very pleased by him, and they accepted him as a king, and they chose for themselves a land conducive to this, and they went and settled there with their king, and he surely led them on the straight path. A faction said that the main purpose is happiness, for when a boy is born, people are happy, and when there is a wedding, people are happy. When conquering a country, people are happy. It follows that the main purpose of everything is only happiness. Therefore they sought a man who would always be happy, for he is after all at the goal, and he should be king over them. They went searching, and they saw a Gentile going along with a disgusting shirt and carrying a bottle of brandy. While following him were several other Gentiles, and this Gentile was very happy because he was very drunk. They saw that this Gentile is very happy and has no concern whatsoever, and they liked him very much, this Gentile, because he has reached the goal. Since the goal is only happiness, they accepted him as a king over them, and surely he led them on the right path. And they chose for themselves a land conducive to this, that is, where there are vineyards, so that they would make wine, and from the seeds of the grapes they would make brandy wine, and nothing whatsoever of the grape bunches should go to waste, because this for them was the main purpose, to drink and go drunk, and always go drunk and get drunk, and always be happy, even though one doesn't know at all what about, for they had nothing at all to be happy about. But it was nevertheless for them the main purpose, to always be happy, and they chose for themselves a land conducive to this as above, and they went and settled there. A faction said that the main thing is wisdom. They sought for themselves a great sage and made him a king over them, and they sought for themselves a land conducive to wisdom, and they went and settled there. A faction said that the main goal is to attend to oneself with food and drink, which is called Pilevin, Yiddish, German, Pilevin, in order to enlarge his limbs, a varim, and they saw they bal a varim, literally master of limbs, that is someone who has large limbs and nurses himself to grow his limbs, that is the members of the body. For since he has big limbs, he has after all a larger portion of the world. For since he has big limbs, he has after all a larger portion in the world, because he takes up more space in the world, and this man is closer to the purpose, because the purpose is after all to grow the limbs. Therefore such a person ought to be a king. They went and found a tall man, which is called a Weingel, Yiddish. They were pleased by him because he had after all large limbs and is at the goal. They accepted him as a king, and they sought a land conducive to this, and they went and settled there. And there was a different group that said that all these things are no goal at all. Instead, the right purpose is to only be involved in prayer to Hashem Yisburach, the blessed God, and to be a humble person and a lowly person, etc. In other words, one should not deem anything of oneself, etc. And they sought for themselves a prayer leader, and they made him a king over them. One will understand already by himself that all the aforementioned factions were all very mistaken and deluded in great folly, each faction in their folly through their foolish hypotheses, through their foolish hypotheses. Through their foolish hypotheses and foolish deductions, only this last faction hit the proper truth. So fortunate are they, and all this was related by one of the strong men before the prayer leader, and he went on to tell him that they, namely the strong men who joined themselves to the warrior, it's mentioned they are from the faction of the limb masters mentioned above. That is the faction that said that the main object is only to nurse oneself, to grow his limbs, who had taken up as a king over themselves, a master of limbs, who had taken up as a king over themselves and master of limbs, that is a large person as mentioned. And the day came to pass, and the company, machane, camp of them were going along. In other words, a great deal of the ample limbed people were going along with the wagons in train, which are called ibis, which are called ibis, Ukrainian obaz, train, bringing along food, drink, and other such things. Now of these large-limbed ones, the world was certainly very afraid, for they were large and mighty men, and whoever encountered them was sure to step off the road. Meanwhile, as the captain of the ample-limbed were going along like that, approaching them from the opposite direction came a big warrior, literally mighty one, and this was the warrior who now goes with them. And the warrior did not step off the road for them, and he went into the camp and dispersed them here and there, and the people of the camp were terrified of him. But he, that is the warrior, went inside among the aforementioned wagons which trailed behind them, and ate up everything that was there. This was an extraordinary novelty to them, that he is such a mighty man, that he is not afraid of them whatsoever, and entered among them and ate up all that was on the wagon. So they immediately fell down before him, saying immediately, "Hail, literally live the king," meaning they immediately made him a king, because he certainly deserves the reign, according to their notion that the main accomplishment is someone who is ample-limbed, as mentioned. Umman. And the king was certainly forgo the kingship for him, because since he is so strong and so well-limbed, he certainly deserves the reign. And so it was, they took him up as king. It is the warrior who came against them, as mentioned, and this is the warrior with whom we now go about conquering the world. But he says that is the warrior who has now become king, of them, that he means not something, that he means something else in his going about conquering the world, for he doesn't at all intend that the world should be under him. Instead, he means something else. All this one of the strong men told the prayer's leader, who had asked him how they joined the warrior. He answered him all this. Asked the prayer leader, wherein is the strength of the warrior who is now your king? He answered them, inasmuch as there was a country that did not want to submit themselves under him. The warrior took his sword, which he has, and his sword has 3 powers. When it is lifted, all the army officers flee, etc. And he recounted the 3 powers explained above, from which the king's warrior got his strength, as mentioned. When the prayer leader heard this, he realized that this is certainly the king's warrior mentioned above. The prayer leader asked if it were possible to be seen by the warrior who was the king. They answered him, it must be announced for approval before him. They went and announced, and he summoned that he should come in. And the prayer leader entered to the warrior. When the prayer leader entered to the warrior, they recognized each other, and there was very great rejoicing between them over their being privileged in being reunited together, and between them was rejoicing and crying, happiness and weeping, for they recalled the king and his men. They cried over that, therefore between them was rejoicing and crying. The prayer leader began to discuss with the warrior by what experiences they arrived here. The warrior told the prayer leader that from the time that there was the storm and wind, they all became dispersed when he returned from where he went to renew his power, and did not find the king with all his people. As mentioned, he then let himself go wherever he would go, and he passed by them all. That is, he understood he was at the place where the king is and where all his people are. That is, he was at a certain place, and he understood that there is certainly where the king is found. However, he was unable to seek and find him, and similarly he passed by another place, understanding that the queen is certainly there. However, he was unable to seek and find her, and thus he passed by all the king's people. Only you have I not passed by. That is the warrior who was telling this to the prayer leader, that he passed by all the places of all the people. Only the place of the prayer leader did he not pass by. The prayer leader replied to him, saying, I passed by all the places, and by your place as well, for I was passing by certain places, and I saw the king's crown standing there, and I understood that the king is certainly here. However, I was unable to seek and find him, and so I went further and passed by a sea of blood, and I understood that this sea is certainly made from the tears of the queen, who weeps over all this, and the queen is certainly here. However, I could not seek and find her, and so I passed by a sea of milk, and I understood that the sea is certainly made for the milk of the queen's daughter, whose son was lost, and the milk pressured her, and from this the sea of milk came to be, and the queen's daughter is certainly here. However, I was unable to seek and find her. However, I was unable to seek and find her. Queen's daughter. The queen's daughter is certainly here, however I was unable to seek and find another one. And so I went further and saw the golden hairs of the child laid out, and I did not take from them whatsoever, and I knew that the child is certainly here. However, it was not possible to seek and find him. And so I went further and was passing by an ocean of wine, and I knew that this ocean is certainly made for the speech of the orator, who stands and speaks consolations before the king and the queen, and then turns his face and speaks consolations to the king's daughter. And from the speech comes to be the ocean of wine, and from the speech comes to be the ocean of wine is written, and the roof of your mouth is like the best wine. However, I could not find him, and so I went further, and I saw a stone standing there, upon which was etched out, just like the hand with its ruts, that is, just like the hand with all the furrows, etc., which had been at the king's as mentioned. And I understood the sage of the king is certainly here, and the sage has engraved for himself the shape of the hand on the stone, but it was not possible to find him. And so I went further, and I saw arranged on a mountain the golden tables, the credences, the golden tables, the credences, display cupboards, and the rest of the king's treasures. And I understood that the king's treasurer, literally warden over the treasures, is certainly here. However, it was impossible to find him. All this the prayer leader told over to the warrior. Replied the warrior, I too passed by all these places, and I did take from the golden hair of the child, for I took 7 hairs that had all sorts of colors, and they are very dear to me, and I settled down and sustained myself with whatever possible, with grass and so forth. Until I had nothing whatsoever to sustain myself. I let myself go where I would go, and when I went away from my place, I forgot my bow there. The prayer leader replied, I saw your bow, and I knew that it was certainly your bow, but I could not find you. The warrior went on telling the prayer leader that when I went away from the place, I went until I encountered the troops mentioned above, that is, the troop of the ample-limbed mighty men mentioned above, and I entered in their midst because I was very hungry and wanted to eat. And as soon as I entered among them, they immediately took me up as a king, as mentioned. And now I go conquering the world, and my intention is perhaps I will be able to find the king and his people mentioned above. The prayer leader began to discuss with the warrior what to do with these people, that is, with the country that is so fallen into the lust of money, until they have gone out to such extraordinary folly that those who have much money are gods with them, and so forth, and other follies the country has, and other folly, and so forth, the other follies the country has. The warrior answered the prayer leader that he had heard from the king that one can take out from any craving someone who has fallen into it, except someone who has fallen in the lust for money. It is impossible to extract him from it by any means. Therefore you will have no effect on them whatsoever, for it is impossible to extract them from this at all, albeit through the way that there is to the sword mentioned above, from where he gets his power, as mentioned. Only through this way can one extract from the lust of money someone who has sunk into it. So he heard from the king. So he heard from the king. The warrior remained together with the prayer leader for a while, and as for the country which beseeched the prayer leader that he should go out to the warrior on the behalf as mentioned, they extended the time. That is, the prayer leader convinced the warrior that he should give them a time, that is, until which he should do nothing at all to them. He allotted them time. Then they made signs between themselves, that is, the prayer leader and the warrior exchanged signs, so that one would be able to get information from the other. Then the prayer leader went off on his way. As the prayer leader went on, he saw people going along and entreating God. Blessed is he, praying and carrying prayer books. He was afraid of them and they were frightened of him too. He stood to pray and they also stood to pray. Then he asked them, who are you? They answered him, inasmuch as when there was the storm wind, the world separated into many factions. Then these choosing this thing and those choosing that thing, just as all the different factions are explained above. At the time we chose for ourselves that the main purpose is only to be involved. Is to only be involved constantly in prayer to Hashem Yisburach, blessed God. We sought and found a master of prayer and made him a king. When the prayer leader heard this, it pleased him exceptionally, for this is what he himself wants. He began to converse with them and show them the order of his prayers and his books and his ideas he had regarding prayers. When they heard his talk, their eyes opened and they saw the greatness of the prayer leader. They immediately made him a king over them, for the king deferred the kingship to him, since they saw that he is quite a great man. He proved that he is set apart on a very, very high level. The prayer leader taught them and opened their eyes and showed them how pray to pray to Hashem, and showed them how to pray to Hashem Yisburach, the blessed God. And he made them into very great complete tzaddikim, for they had been tzaddikim before as well, since they had involved themselves solely in prayer. Albeit the prayer leader, albeit the prayer leader opened their eyes until they became extremely great tzaddikim. The prayer leader sent a letter to the warrior and informed him how he was privileged and had found such people as he wants and had become king over them. Nanach nachu nachu meyumon, nanach nachu nachu meyumon. Nanach nachu nachu meyumon, nanach nachu meyumon, nanach nachu meyumon.